This week on Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a natural gas pipeline that has opposition from both sides of the aisle. What's the problem with this project and what can be done to get it back on track? Plus, a quick look at the very quick session ahead for the legislature and some major reforms for the Department of Corrections. Why it matters to people inside and outside of prison walls. That's all ahead this week on Pennsylvania Newsmakers.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host.
Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. I am Mike Straub from WGAL TV 8, filling in this week, just keeping the seat warm for Dr. Terry Madonna. He'll be back next week, not to worry. Well, lots to talk about in the state as things continue to get going, as the legislature starts to crank back up, some elections ahead. But how about the natural gas industry continuing to create some potential headaches? And joining us to talk about that and many other things, Senator John Rafferty, the 44th District, Montgomery, Chester, and Berks County.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here.
My honor, Michael. Thank you.
We appreciate you making time for us, and you didn't think you'd have such a headache on your hands with a natural gas pipeline. We're talking about the Mariner 2 East. I talked to a friend at DEP one time. He said, I have a full-time job dealing with this pipeline. There's been some headaches as the process has gone on. From where you're sitting now, give folks an update on what's going on with that project.
Sure. We have a number of pipelines in Southeast. In fact, we work very closely with Linda Farrell, who has a map of all the pipelines traveling through the Southeast. This has been the most difficult one to deal with because of Sunoco, and I'll lay it right out there. It's the company. We're trying to make sure, myself, Senator Dinniman, Senator Killian, Representative Cometa, and Representative Corbin, to make sure that we have safety procedures in place for not only the residents that live near the pipeline and the schools that are near the pipeline, but for the workers themselves. Mm-hmm. These workers are well-trained, highly skilled. They want to make sure those pipelines are put in properly. They want to make sure they're installed properly. They live there in those communities. They want to make sure they operate safely. That's what we're trying to do, have more transparency, more oversight for the management and safety regulations regarding that pipeline. Those easements were 50, 60, 70 years ago, mm-hmm. and they were empty fields. Well, today they're now residential communities. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to make sure that the homeowners, the municipalities, the county, and the state officials all have in place proper safeguards to have oversight for safety regulations, safety installation of the pipeline.
Well, let's give folks an update on kind of what this pipeline has meant to the state. This is a major east-west pipeline. There's been a number of issues with contaminated drinking water. And then maybe the most visual were the sinkholes that were happening. Was that in Chester County?
It was in Chester County, Delaware County. Yep.
Sinkholes throughout the line. But at the same time, we have plenty of other pipelines being built. Atlantic Sunrise comes to mind. Almost no issues at all of that level. So it's important to point out this isn't an indictment on the entire industry.
It's the one company that we're having the issues with. Mm-hmm. Other ones will come in and try to work with the municipalities, try to work with the property owners. Sunoco themselves, the management of Sunoco, has just been forging ahead mm-hmm. to try to make sure that they get this project built. They're looking at the dollars over the safety. NASA's very concerned. I mean, I'm looking now at expenditures for meters to go on police cars that are traveling in those areas at nights to detect any kind of leak so we can call it in right away ahead of time. And they're out there. There's a lot of technology out there that we want to force Sunoco to use in the installation and the operation of those pipelines to keep people safe.
And we're talking about the potential dangers of these pipelines. We can't skip over the fact that we just had an explosion out in Beaver County, and that pipeline had just been filled with gas. It was still in a testing phase, from what I understand, and then a major explosion that no one was killed, thank God, but there was a home completely destroyed, shut down a major highway, and that pipeline was built by Energy Transfer, which is the Sunoco company, the same folks who are building this Mariner East. So that really raised the heightened awareness for a lot of people once that accident happened.
It did. And Michael, one of the things that we found, the legislators, as we've been working on this, no one agency in the state has oversight. Mm-hmm. DEP has some, PUC has some, then maybe FERC has some, maybe PHMSA has some from the federal side. So we're trying now with the legislation that we proposed to move it under either one agency like PennDOT, which I've been advocating for, because they're the ones that are schooled in the movement of commodities and goods, and this is what you're doing, or giving more authority to DEP or PUC for siting of the pipelines and for oversight to make sure that they're installed safely and are monitored safely throughout their operation.
Well, there you go. This is an industry that means so much to so many people across the state. It continues to do good work for some communities and makes us a worldwide player in energy. So what needs to happen? What are you and your colleagues from both sides of the aisle, as we mentioned, striving for with this pipeline project? What's the next step?
What we'd like to do for all pipeline future projects is have a landowner bill of rights written by the Attorney General's office where they know what their rights are under condemnation. But we want to make sure going forward, because a lot of people say we don't want it. Well, the easements are already there. They've been there for years. We aren't going to stop it, but we want to make sure that it's done properly. We want to make sure that the safeguards are in place. And we want to try to have a siting authority under DEP in the future that they can say to the pipeline company, look, we get it, there's your easement, but if you move it 500 feet over here, and then cooperation from, it might cost the companies money. The work will still be done by the skilled workers, might cost the company money, but it moves it out of those dangerous areas. And I really think that the state should step up and have more oversight in the placement of these pipelines, certainly to supervise the safe operations of these pipelines, and that the companies themselves need to cooperate more and expend the dollars needed to put the equipment in place to make sure that the residents and certainly the workers installing the pipelines are all safe and secure.
Very good. Well, from what I understand, Sunoco plans to have that pipeline operating by the end of this year, so it's a story that we'll be continuing to follow really across the state, because as we said, that pipeline really goes east-west across Pennsylvania. So the senator's not going anywhere. When we come back, we want to talk about some improvements he's trying to make to increase penalties on drunk driving in Pennsylvania, and also give us a look at what can the legislature do in just those few days they're back before the election. That's all straight ahead on Pennsylvania Newsmakers.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. Mike Straub filling in for Terry Madonna this week. And once again, joining us, Senator John Rafferty, 44th District. Appreciate you being here. We appreciate your insight on the pipelines. Want to shift gears a little bit to a bill that's meant a lot to you and a lot of people, particularly, I think, of Lancaster County and the family of Meredith Demko, a girl who was killed by a repeat offender drunk driver. He was high on a number of drugs at the time. And that's led to some proposals to change drunk driving penalties in Pennsylvania. Can you help folks give an update on what's going on there?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Chris and Sue Demko have been stalwarts on this issue and great allies for me as we've gone forward. Now, recently the legislature enacted, and with Chris and his organization's support in MAD, we recently did ignition interlock for first-time offenders. So people then can qualify for the ignition interlock, still keep their jobs, to be able to sustain their family, go to church and what have you, and hopefully they'll realize that they have a problem. But we're seeing more and more repeat DUI offenders, and certainly the tragic case of Meredith Demko, her life being cut short after high school before she had a chance to go to her sinus. And we just dedicated a highway to Trooper Kenton Iwanek, who was killed in Chester County, 24 years of age, finishes a shift, driving home, a repeat DUI offender comes across the highway, kills him. She's fine, and she had a 4-year-old daughter in the car with her at the time. Fortunately, the daughter was fine. So it's mandatory for us in Pennsylvania, where we're facing 300 deaths by DUI vehicle collisions in 2016, and we are one of the weakest states for DUI laws. We don't have a felony DUI. So now we have Senate Bill 691 in the House of Representatives, passed the Senate. I think it was 45-4, something like that, to vote. It's in the House now. We're hoping that they move it when we go back up. This would create a felony DUI in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and which we're all very pleased with, Mike, going forward, is for the first time, that we're going to increase the penalties for those who have repeat DUIs who kill somebody. So they could face a 5-year, or they could face up to 7 years in jail. Right now, no matter what DUI offense you're under, if you kill somebody in your car, you get 3 years in prison. 3 years in prison, that's it. So we have turned that around now. And with this Senate Bill 961, if convicted of DUI, minimum sentences causing the death is 5 years, and if convicted 2 or more prior DUIs, the minimum sentence for causing death is 7 years. So Pennsylvania is now moving up. Very supportive of the bill. My office worked hard on that bill, along with some of my colleagues in the Senate. The Demcos, Chris and Sue, are right out front with this. The Arwanics and a number of the other families involved in Parents Against Impaired Driving.
I've had some really powerful conversations with the Demcos probably at one of your events in the last year or so. So that's important work, and we appreciate that. You mentioned that that's something you hope that the legislature can do in the short time that they're back. There's only a few days scheduled between now and really the start of the next session. Some big topics are hanging out there when we talk about the increased bills against protecting victims out in light of the grand jury investigation. Shrinking the state legislature has been out there for a while. There's so many things that are suddenly piling up. A major to-do list from the conversations you're having. What should we expect in this short session in the next couple of weeks?
Well, in the 9 days left, my focus is on the DUI legislation. My focus is also on the work safety zone camera legislation that's currently in the House, which we believe the House will concur in, and will get to the governor, or maybe some tweaks and send back to us. This will provide safety for the workers on the Pennsylvania Turnpike and our major highways. Also, I'm hoping that we address the child abuse initiatives from the grand jury report, the 4 initiatives. I've been very outspoken for 2.5 years on certainly one of those aspects, and another aspect that one of the representatives has introduced a bill on. We did pass in the Senate overwhelmingly Senate Bill 501, which would take the weapons away from someone under a PFA. Worked on that language, worked with all the interest groups on the language, passed unanimously in the Senate. It's been sitting over in the House. We're hopeful that the House addresses those issues. Very important. These are all life-saving issues that we want to make sure that we get before the governor for his signature. And as you mentioned, there are other bills as well, including restoration of licenses, where we've been pretty strict on that in Pennsylvania. The House passed a bill. We had to modify it in the Senate. We'll get that to the governor, where people would lose their licenses for reasons not related to traffic situations, and it really hampered them going forward, or forced them to face a situation where they may have to break the law and drive without a license suspension. We're working on all that.
Oh man, you just listed enough stuff for 2 whole years, and that's 9 days. The PFA bill is what I was trying to mention, but I know Monday is a very big day. There's a number of events around the Capitol involving the victims of sexual abuse and the statute of limitations, so it'll be really interesting to see what comes out of that. Senator Rafferty, really appreciate your time and your insight today. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsmakers, and I'm sure we'll see you again soon.
Most pleased to be with you, Michael. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Well, still to come, lots more to talk about. Some major changes to the Department of Corrections. We're going to look back at the summer they had and why it impacts those who are inmates, working, and also those of us outside those prison walls. We've got the Secretary of Corrections coming up when Newsmakers continues.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. Mike Straub from WGAL TV8 filling in for Dr. Terry Madonna. Not to worry, he'll be back in this seat next week, but now we're shifting gears a little bit. We're joined by, once again, a friend of the program, Secretary of Corrections, John Wetzel. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Always good to be here.
All right, appreciate it so much. And it's been a long summer, to say the least, for Department of Corrections, for the statewide prison system. There have been some major changes as a result of that. Folks have followed the lockdown, but let's go further back in time. Give folks an idea of what was happening inside prisons that sort of led up to the decision to then start a 12-day lockdown.
Yeah, so we had a drug problem inside our prisons, and it's not. I'm not happy to tell you that or report that, but that's the reality. In the 2 months leading up to the lockdown, we had 22 inmates sent out for drug overdoses in July, 23 in August. At the same time, August in particular, we sent about 30 staff members out who were exposed to this synthetic drug. And so it really forced us to make this drastic step of a lockdown. I mean, I think it was Viktor Frankl who said, an abnormal response to an abnormal situation is the definition of normal. So this is very unusual for us to have this much drugs come in our prisons. So we felt like we had to take a drastic step, lock down the system, and just calm everything down.
I think that for folks who are a long way removed from the prison system, they're going to say, you had drug overdoses in your prisons? Can you help folks understand the process of how these drugs were getting in?
Yeah, and it really goes to the core of the changes we made. This synthetic cannabinoid, the form of it is an odorless liquid that's almost undetectable. So it was getting smuggled in through the mail, through legal mail, through visits, sometimes even through staff. And so it was coming in, and this new form makes it very difficult to detect.
Sure.
And so as a direct result of that, we had a serious increase in our drug issues inside the prison. So like I said, when the music changes, so does the dance. So we really had to do a little soul searching as a department and as an administration, figure out how we could make our prisons safe, because prisons that have drug issues are not safe prisons, and you can't do anything. You talk about rehabilitation, talk about creating an environment where people can leave better than they came in. None of that can happen when you have prisons infested with drugs.
Yeah, as I like to say, Department of Corrections is not just Department of sheer punishment. We're trying to make sure people are rehabilitated.
Or warehousing, for that matter.
Right, absolutely. And so I just want to make this clear. It's about somehow this odorless material was coming in through paper most often.
Yes.
So you would soak the paper or the ink on the paper?
Yeah, so we actually had some instances where individuals were injecting ink cartridges with this, and so the letters on the paper were actually the drugs, and then they were either smoking it, and we've had some officers obviously walk by an inmate who's smoking these and get the effect of K2 or spice or some of the kind of common terms for it. So yeah, it was very, very difficult using traditional means, very difficult to stop the introduction of this inside our prisons.
And I think it's important to point out, this is not about inmates hurting themselves. You had a number of your staff who were, pretty seriously disrupted, to say the least, because of being exposed to this stuff. That's how serious this stuff is.
Absolutely, and the effects of this really mimic a heart attack, right? So blood pressure increase, dizziness, sometimes passing out, feeling flushed, and especially early on, the first couple exposures we had, people didn't know what it was. Yeah. Right? So you either searching an inmate or you walk by a cell and you breathe in the smoke and all of a sudden you're exhibiting symptoms. It's pretty frightening. I mean, think about walking into your workplace and you touch that paper and next thing you know, you're getting ready to pass out.
No, it sounds terrifying. So that is a great explanation of what was going on in the prisons. We're going to change gears when we come back and talk about the changes that were made and the drastic steps the Department of Corrections had to take, the lockdown, the 12 days of that lockdown, and what's going to change going forward to make sure these prisons are safer for inmates and for staff. That's all ahead when Newsmakers continues.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. Mike Straub in for Terry Madonna, once again joined by Secretary John Wetzel, Secretary of Corrections in Pennsylvania. Did a great job of laying out the downright scary situation of drug use going on in the prisons. That led to a drastic decision. Tell us what led up to the decision to lock down the prisons.
Yeah, so the day we locked down, we sent 6 officers from SCI Albion up by Erie out who were exposed to this liquid cannabinoid. Inmates brought it in at commitment. It spilled on the table at intake.
Oh my gosh!
They touched it, didn't know what they were touching, didn't have gloves on, which is one of the things we really focus on in training, making sure we're using safe precautions. Touched one of their membranes, mucous membranes, so mouth, nose. Six officers sent out. Shortly thereafter, Ohio sent 20 officers out.
Oh, okay. Well, it's important to know it's not just Pennsylvania.
Right,
Providence.
no, certainly, all over the country.
Yeah.
So that really, we really just felt like we had to stabilize the system. We had to just slow everything down. Too many inmate overdoses, too many staff exposed. So we locked down the system and really focused on, one, training staff to use that protective equipment. Because it's not like it's not a particulate exposure, so you can't breathe it in. It's physically touching. So the safe use of protective equipment like gloves puts you in a position where you're not going to get exposed, right? So we trained all 18,000 staff during that 10 days. We trained 93% of all our staff were trained in that 10 days in that. We also developed hazmat teams at each prison because some of these exposures, we actually had emergency personnel and first responders also feeling the effects of the K2, right? So we thought that it was better if we have a suspected situation, seal the area, and then let our hazmat teams come in. So we were able to do that during that 12-day lockdown. At the same time, we drastically changed how we do business as it relates to mail and books in particular, and visits.
Okay, help folks understand that. I think that's the biggest change, I think, for folks on the outside. No more direct mail to prisoners. No
direct mail to prisoners. What you do is you mail it to an address that we have, and it's on our website, www.cor.pa.gov. And you mail it, the mail gets scanned in, the inmate gets it the next day. So we print it out. Pictures print out in color, but the actual documents will never come in again. So if, for some of the few people, and again, one of the things I want to stress is the vast majority of inmates do not use drugs, right? But for the few people who were trying to get drugs in that way, don't waste your time, because it's not coming in now. What we also did is we're also now copying the legal mail right in front of the inmate on camera and giving them that copy and then sealing the original. What we've also done is modified the visit room. We used to have vending in the visit room, so when you're visiting with your families, and again, I want to stress that visits with families are important. Like the notion of a kid coming in and not being able to touch their parent, that's not what we want to get to. But by the same token, we've had people who bring drugs into the visit room, hide it, and then conceal it in either the food or the drink, and then the inmate would ingest it, and that's almost impossible to detect. So we've eliminated visiting, at least for the next 90 days, and then books. We've had things like Suboxone, which is a drug that comes in a little strip, like those breast strips, sealed, like even in the Bible, like in the binding of the Bible, right? So what we've done is changed how people order books. They now order it through us, where we're actually the middle person. We're not adding a cost to it, but you can't go to the bookstore and have something sent directly to an inmate. And again, out of abundance of caution.
We're almost completely out of time. In the last few seconds here, response from your staff, overwhelmingly positive to hear these changes are being made?
Yeah, I think staff feel safer. It's always, listen, we adjust, then there's an adjustment by the few people who are trying to break the rules, but we're making significant progress. I just asked for the family members to really focus on keeping everybody safe, and for the advocates, some of them are a little worked up about it, just work with us. We're just trying to create a safe environment, that's all.
Thank you so much, Secretary Wetzel, for being here, and thank you for joining us on Pennsylvania Newsmakers this week. Terry will be right back here. Have a great weekend.